is the answer. And I wanted to share some things tonight because I really believe that it is important for us as Christians who live in this age to be, he says, watch and pray. And I feel like, it isn't watch like observers to what's going on. It's not on? Oh, okay. It's so that we can pray. And so I wanted, because of the events of this week, I really wanted to share some things because I feel like it really is important for us as Christians to recognize our assignment in a very broken world. And it was easy to see this week how broken our world is. We're going to start reading in Romans chapter 8. I want to start with verse 18. This is the Apostle Paul writing to the church in Rome. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Did you get that? How important is this? He says, any suffering that we go through, any difficulties, any problems, any stretching, stressing, that goes on in our lives, he says, this is the Apostle Paul, that there is a glory that's going to come after that is going to far surpass what we have suffered. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. Did you get that? Whoa. He's saying the creation, our earth, the weather, the storms, the earthquakes, all of this, the creation is waiting eagerly. You got to get that. It's waiting eagerly for the sons of God to be revealed. How many of you are sons of God? Now, do you know that God is going to reveal who you are to our world? This is what he says. For the creation was, now listen, this is almost too much to believe. The creation was subjected to frustration. At least that's what this translation says. The creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope. Now you got to get this, because this is, it's contradictory. We understand that our world, from the time of sin coming into our world, has been cursed. That's the reasons why we have earthquakes and storms that are so destructive, tidal waves, all of these kinds of things that show very clearly that our world, our creation, is cursed. Bad things keep happening in our world. This translation says, was subjected to frustration. I think that's pretty classic. And what it's saying is the creation, and we don't often see this, but we do in this scripture and several others, the creation has a mind of its own. Do you see this? The creation, first of all, is waiting. Second of all, is frustrated. How many of you understand? When God originally built the world, He built it perfect. It didn't have all of these things going on. And so what it says is the creation, remembering how God made it in the first place, would love to get back to its perfection. But it's frustrated. The creation is frustrated. And, let's go on. Now, I don't want you to miss this. It was frustrated by the will of the one who subjected it. And then these words, in hope. Now, what in the world is he talking about? We'll get some more of this in a minute, but just you got to put this together. What he's saying is he wrecked the creation. He twisted it, he broke it in hope. That doesn't hardly make sense. But we will see in a minute that there are other instances of this, and it'll I think begin to make sense. That the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay. What he's saying is that our creation right now is in a state of decay, or a state of crumbling, or a state of destructive self-destruction. And he says there will be a time when it will be liberated. The creation will be liberated and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. Now here we go again. You know, he's saying that there's going to be a revelation, there's going to be a redemption, there's going to be a freedom, there's going to be a glory that is going to come to the children of God. And when that comes to the children of God, at the same time, the creation will come into its glory. Now, this is fascinating. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth. Now, here again, we're seeing, frustration. The creation itself is experiencing all of this. Here it says that it's experiencing a groaning, a kind of thing, and he puts it in the context of the pains of childbirth. Now that changes the whole nature. When we think in terms of pain, if it's pain for no reason at all, that's a bummer. But if it's pain that's going towards something glorious, which is what he is saying, right? That's what he said right at the beginning. This pain is going to experience this great glory, and what he's saying here, it's like childbirth. And of course, that's the awesomeness of childbirth, is that when the pain is over, you have a baby. And I'm not going to go into that whole thing, but I do want for you to understand that this is not a terrible thing, it's a wonderful thing, right? Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Oh my goodness. What is he saying? I mean, you get what he's saying. He's saying there's going to be a time. And most of us are excited about the time when there won't be any more sickness. Woo! There won't be any more weakness. There won't be any more, bodily injuries. Oh, how awesome that's going to be. And we look forward to that. But what he's saying is in the same way that we groan or, anticipate the freedom that's going to come, the creation is going through the same kind of groaning, waiting for the time that it's going to be freed. Okay, now why did I say all of this? Well, I want for us to understand, what's wrong with this? Something isn't right here. Okay. What he's saying here, and the reason that I feel like it's so applicable, is if you were watching the news this week and saw what was going on in Baltimore, I want to try to do this in a way that is going to be helpful to us, where we can see that the breakdown in society, the breakdown in humanity, part of it was what God did. Now, I want for you to think about this for a minute. Why would God break it and then say, in hope? Anybody have an idea why he would do that? He would break it and say, in hope. Anybody got a suggestion? What's that? To get our attention. Well, part of it for sure, to get our attention. But this is an interesting concept. God is saying, I want to heal you. I want to fix you. I want to bring glory to you. Right? That's God's intention. And so he says, in the meantime, you are going to be groaning. I've given you enough insight, I've given you enough understanding of what's going to take place so that you develop a desire for this, a hunger for this. I am not going to go through. I really would like for us to celebrate the Lord's Supper tonight. So I'm not going to go through this in as much detail as there is to go, but in Numbers 21, there is the story of the Jewish nation while they were out in the wilderness. This is before they got to Kadesh Barnea, before they got into the promised land, while they were still wandering out there. And there is I don't know what you call it, a commentary on their grumbling. We've talked a little bit about this before, especially, and we'll probably close with it in Hebrews chapter 3, where God says how awful, how destructive grumbling is. Do you guys understand how destructive grumbling is? It not only destroys us who are doing the grumbling, but it destroys those who hear us grumbling. Does that make sense? And so what God did, and this was obviously symbolic, is he sends snakes. And the snakes start biting people, and when they get bitten, what happens to them? Unless something changes what happens, they die. How many of you understand there is something symbolic about grumbling and dying? Most of us understand that God was really upset with the Jewish nation, when they stood there ready to go into the promised land, all these centuries they had been waiting, all these centuries they had been telling their children that we're going into a land that flows with milk and honey. And when they get there, the report comes back saying, oh, we can't go in. Why can't we go in? Well, because there's giants there. What made them think that was so bad? We've talked about this before, so I won't take a long time to talk about it. But the idea is, instead of having faith being built during this time in the wilderness, all of the grumbling that went on killed their faith. So there were only 2 guys in the whole nation who actually felt like, yes, God will deliver our enemies into our hands. They had the faith to believe that. The rest believed that this is a terrible situation. It's going to be awful. We are going to be destroyed. We're going to be hurt. It's not going to go well for us. Okay? Where does that come from? Grumbling. I want to say grumbling does kill faith. And I don't have the time to really go into this. So let me just conclude that part of the story. God didn't send the snakes until he sent the cure. Now, this is interesting. A God who punishes by saying you're going to die for your sin, for your mistake, for the terrible stuff that you've done, but here's the cure. Do you understand what kind of a God he is? I'm going to punish you, but here's the cure. It really tells us about the heart of God. And this is such an interesting thing, because this fits with what we were looking at in Romans, right? He says, the creation is going to be troubled. It's going to be broken. It's going to be hurt. It's going to be living with a groaning desire to do or be something different than what it is, in hope. This is fascinating to me. And I want to say this because I feel like it's important. As we hear people grumble, the way we have heard this week, the people in Baltimore grumbling, I want to say Jesus never minimized people's problems. Do you understand what I'm saying? He didn't say to the guy that was possessed with a demon, he didn't say, oh, you need to think more positive thoughts. You've obviously gotten too negative. All this time that you've been possessed, you've gotten too negative. The cure is to start thinking more positively. Jesus did not minimize people's problems, but he brought the cure. Why am I saying this? Because I feel like we, as his representatives, God's representatives in our world, don't minimize what people are saying. They're saying, I am hurting. I am devastated. I can't get to the place that I want to be. I can't have the things that I would like to have. I am, so to speak, entrapped in this society. I can't get the education that I want. I can't get the abilities, the capabilities that I want. And so what are they saying? Things have not gone well for me. Now, what do we say in response to this? We can't say, oh, well, you just need to think more positive thoughts, right? We need to be able to bring the solution, the healing. We need to be able to really bring solutions to these things. Now, a part of the reason I'm sharing this is because I want for us to see, why does God do this? Why does He send the snakes to bite and then send the cure? Because, I mean, this is behind it, is He wants us to run to Him. He wants for us to recognize our dependence on Him. Now, we live in an age where our leaders do not want to run to God. And so they keep coming up with, we've got the solution. I don't know how many times I've heard this week. The solution to what's going on in Baltimore is more jobs. Now, I don't want to poo-poo that idea. I mean, sure, more jobs would be wonderful. That would be good. But how many of you understand that the real cure is not going to come from our solutions? The real cure is going to come when they are able to have their hearts healed, their hearts fixed, when they're actually able. You know, the difficulty with what is going on is when you get stuck in this mentality for a while, it's hard for you to see anything else. You know, I kept hearing, it was almost like they were talking different languages. The reporters were saying, well, what about if you would, and they're going, you're not hearing me. I can't do that. That's impossible. That'll never happen. Now, that isn't what the reporters were saying, but it was the disconnect that was coming. And we as Christians in our world need to recognize the world is not hearing what God is saying. They're not hearing that there is a peace. There is a place of fulfillment. There is a place of joy. We talked about this a few weeks ago, where, you know, where the church is saying, out of your deep poverty, you were asking to give more. Where does that come from? You know, we understand it comes from the Spirit of God in us. We are not looking at our bank account and saying, well, this is all I can give. It's impossible for me to give more. I can't do anything more than what I've done already. That's not the way we operate. We operate from the Spirit of God in us that says, what can I do? How can I help? How can I get involved in your life? This is a whole interesting phenomenon. And why I am doing this is because I want for you to understand we have a mission. We are responsible. This is our assignment in our world. How are we doing? Not very well. Okay. I'm just going to throw this out to you. You're going to have to do the thinking here, the processing, to make this as much of a point as I would like for it to be. But anytime we are ashamed of where we are, we would like to have done better, we think we should have done better, we will always come up. Now, I call it an excuse, and I don't mean that in a bad light. We come up with some reason. It's because of the government. It's because of taxes. It's because we live on an island. It's because, we always come up with something, right? Everybody comes up with something as a reason for my not doing as well as I think I should. Now, the reason I bring that up is I just want to say, as long as I hold on to my excuse, I don't have any chance of getting better. Does that make sense? If I don't hold on to my excuse, I start looking for how I can get better. I hope that makes sense. I hope that we can see this. And I hope that we can implement this, because I feel like we are going to be called on more in the next months than ever before in our lives to minister to people who are a part of a broken society. And it's not going to help for us to say, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You're just playing the victim role. It's not going to do us any good to say that. Is that going to help them? No. But if we can say, I can walk with you through this, we can pray for solutions, they're going to begin to see that God is on their side and God wants to open things up for them. They are not hopeless. Oh. Okay, that's all the time I have for that, but I just throw it out to you. I just want to read this part in Hebrews 3. We've read a lot of times before, but I want for you to hear this because it's so powerful. This is Hebrews 3. Look at verse 7. Today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion during the time of testing in the desert, where your fathers tested and tried me, and for 40 years saw what I did. I was angry with that generation. Their hearts always go astray. They have not known my ways. They shall not enter into my rest. Why do I read that? Because I just want for us to understand. We've got to learn it first. I want to say, we've got to quit complaining. Does that make sense? We have a God. We have a Lord who wants to help us with all of our problems, with all of our struggles. Now, of course, we know people in church, Christians, they don't grumble. So we are going to stand out like sore thumbs if we start grumbling, right? But what he says, what happens to us is our heart gets hard. Does that make sense? This is what he's saying. If we start grumbling, our heart gets hard. Today, if you want to hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion during the time of testing in the desert. That's during that time that things went wrong. And what did they do? They resisted. They didn't want to follow God because they were afraid, because they didn't want to be hurt anymore. And I just want to say, let's us practice this. Quit grumbling. Quit complaining. Let's not let the church, the Christian community, be a complaining part of the society. Because what it does is it's hardening our hearts, and we don't want that. We want to be able to hear from God. We want to be able to know what God is saying, where God is going, what God is wanting to do. Okay? Whew. That was a race through this teaching. But I do want for you to understand that this is our assignment in our world today. What we saw happening this week, I mean, it sounded like we were on the verge of a civil war. And we still might be. I mean, the fact that these marches are happening in big cities all over the United States in sympathy with what was going on in Baltimore. What does that say? It says there's a lot of people who are really hurting, and who are going to be the healers. We're it, right? We are. Whether you believe it or not. I mean, this is God's plan. This is our assignment. Okay? Let's pray.